In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to set up and use the Intelligent Teaching and Learning with Computers client, or iTALC. I use this in classroom environments quite a bit, and the nice thing about it is it's completely free to use. It allows me to remote control computers, remote view them, turn them on, turn them off, and it is cross-platform. So you could use this on Linux, Windows, whatever. And it's compatible with stuff all the way back to XP and probably even earlier. So this is a pretty nice tool to use in classroom environments and probably elsewhere as well. So first thing I need to do is I need to download it. You'll notice that I am at italc.sourceforge.net. You could also do a Google search for iTalc and you'll probably find the website for it. The download link will take you to a donation link, and I think this is such great software. I think it's probably worth donating to. But I'm going to click continue for now, and I'm going to take a look at the official builds. They are hosted on SourceForge, and you can get them right through this link here. And you'll notice on SourceForge that there's a couple of different versions. There were some prior versions, but the ones that we're interested in are the most recent in the 2. branch. So I'm going to go to the 202, and I'm going to download iTalc 202 Win64 setup because the computer that I'm going to be using this on happens to be a 64-bit Windows computer. If you have a 32-bit Windows computer, this one works great, and if you have Linux, you could go this route. But I'm going to get the iTalc 202 set up, and then I'm going to download that. And at this point, you'll need to download it and maybe save it to a USB flash drive or copy it over the network. Make sure it's on all of your computers, and this can actually be a pre-deployment computer as well. It doesn't need to be installed necessarily after the computers are deployed. Once your file is downloaded, you're ready to install. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate installing this on 2 servers. This server is going to be my teacher station, and this server is going to be my users, my individual students. So I've got the installation file on both of them, and again, you could use a flash drive or whatever you want for that. Just make sure that file is accessible on both machines. And also, this one could be a staging machine. This could be the machine over here, this client machine, this student machine, that you're preparing to roll out to everybody, because the installation is the same and you don't need to change a thing about it. So even if you're going to set this one up and then sysprep it or something like that to roll it out to a lot of different clients, you can still do this before your deployment. Now the only one that's really unique is the teacher station, because this one's going to have a private key that the client station doesn't have. So here's my setup wizard, and it's a pretty simple wizard. It's a GPL product, so open source. The default is okay for most of this stuff. And this is really the main component that is going to differ between the teacher station and then the student station. It's whether or not we need the iTalc master component. For the teacher station, we do need that. We would uncheck that for the client. We run through the installation process, and it'll launch the iTalc management console. Now in my case, I always choose to use only the key file authentication. I turn off the ACL based authentication because in many cases computer labs or labs with student computers and teacher stations don't necessarily have individual logins. So the ACL based doesn't always work all that great for me, so I tend to turn that one off, and we really only need one authentication method. But what this says is that anybody sitting at the teacher station will be able to use the iTalc client to view the student stations. The next thing I need to do from the teacher station is I need to launch the key file assistant. This is going to create my public and private key pair, which is going to allow me secure communication to all of these client machines. I'm going to create a new set of keys. This is for the master computer. When I'm on the client station, I'll be choosing the import public key option, but for now I need to create the new access keys. And in my case, I'm going to use the teacher role, the default role. But you can actually use multiple keys in parallel. I'm also going to choose to export the public key part, and in my case, I'll just toss it on the desktop because that's going to make things a little bit quicker and easier for me to find it later on when I copy this over to the other machine. And then I can say finish. And the access keys get created. This is the public key. All clients are going to get a copy of this one. It's the private key that actually is stashed in here that needs to be kept secret. And if you ever need to do any type of backup or restoration of this implementation, this is the private key that you're going to want to go and grab. And then I say apply since I have made some changes. It stops and restarts the iTALC service. If you're going to do a reboot anyway, you probably don't need to do that process. But I do it anyway just to be sure. And I'm going to close this out. And now my teacher station is actually mostly configured. I'm still going to come back and configure a little bit more in a second. I'm going to run the client installation now. And we're going to run through almost the same process. Now, one thing I need to go and do is I need to get this public key copied over onto the client as well. So this is usually done by a USB flash drive or the network. I'm just going to toss it over on the network right now. Okay, so I pulled this file over the network. I can go through my installation. And in this case, on my client machine, I don't need the iTALC master. I only need the client portion. And what this actually is going to do is it's going to set up a VNC service that's going to run behind the scenes here. And you can choose whether or not you want to show the tray icon and let users know that this service is running, or you can kind of keep it secret if that's more what you're after. The other nice thing about this is if there are any firewalls turned on, iTALC will poke a hole in the firewall for you, so you don't need to do all of that stuff manually. Here's where you could choose to hide the tray icon if you'd like. I'm going to do that in my case. It's just one less thing for users to be concerned about. And then the next thing, I go to authentication. I turn off the ACL based authentication on the client, and I can launch the key file assistant. And this is going to let me import the public key so that when we're doing our communication, the public key can be used in order to talk exclusively to the teacher station. It makes sure that all of our data is valid. It makes sure that the only person that can listen in on this screen is the actual teacher station. We never want a user or a student to get a hold of the private key that was over here, or they could actually watch somebody else's screen. I'm going to import that same teacher role because that's the key I created, and now I'm going to specify the location of that public key, and it could be your flash drive. I copied it over onto my desktop. That's really what I'm looking for. So I'll jump to the desktop and I'll grab that key and I'll finish my wizard. It imports it into this other location. So we could have done this probably an easier way and just copied it there, but this way we're going through the wizard and letting it know exactly where everything belongs, and it's placing it where it belongs. I'll apply this service as well, since now we're using this based on a new public key. It stops and starts the service, and you'll notice that there is no tray icon down here. I no longer need these parts. The public key was copied elsewhere into my program files directory, and then the installation is no longer needed, so I'll just toss those out. And over here, I don't need this one either. I can actually get that from another location in my program files directory, and I don't need to do the install. It's up to you whether or not you want to keep your desktop icon, or if you like to keep your desktop clean. This will remain in the tray because when I did the installation on the teacher station, I did not have it remove the icon. Now the next thing I need to do is I need to set up this client so it can be seen by this server. Everything at this point happens from within this iTALC program. Now the first thing that pops up looks like an error, but it really isn't. It's just saying there is no configuration file yet. One thing that's nice to do here, though, is to kind of take a look at where this configuration file is going to go. If you have multiple teacher profiles on your station, you can copy this configuration file to each individual user profile. Mine is going into users, administrator, domain 01, app data, roaming, iTALC. But if I have a lot of different users logging in, I could take this and toss it into the default profile. So any new teacher would automatically get a copy of the configuration file in order to use that in that classroom. So that's kind of a nice thing to do. So I'll say OK to this, and it's actually going to create a default configuration file for me. And I can start to set up the iTALC interface. A couple things I need to know. I need to know my IP address, and I need to know my MAC address for all of my clients. Now you can do this a couple of ways. In my case, I'm going to use this particular network adapter. So I'm keying in on my IP address and my MAC address. Now you can also do this using the host name, although it can be a little spotty and you'll want to test that out. It all depends on how you're resolving your names. If they're resolved in DNS, that should work fine. But oftentimes I find that static addresses do work better. DHCP, the address is going to change, so that wouldn't be your best bet. You'll need either the IP address to remain constant or the host name to remain constant. Back over here on the server, I'm going to open up the classroom manager. There's a couple of different components here, like where you can capture snapshots. If a student's cheating during a test, I like to take a snapshot of their screen so I have some proof. They would all be there. We've got some configuration on how quickly things update, and etc. And also, I tend to like to change my default double-click action to view live and full screen. So if I want to see what somebody's screen is, and I double-click on their screen, I don't want it to come up in remote control mode, because that might mess up what they're doing. I'm actually then remote controlling them. So this is a nice option to change. It won't take effect until you restart, but that's okay. Now the next thing I need to do is I need to add a classroom. You can't add any computers until you add a classroom. So I'm going to say my classroom. Just because this is just a demonstration, I don't actually have a classroom, but you could actually line up a whole bunch of classrooms if you wanted here. So I have a classroom. And then within that classroom, I can add a computer. Now we can go with IP or host name. In my case, I'm going to use the IP address. I'm going to scoot this over so I can see both at once. And I'm going to use the IP address 192.168.1.3 because in my case I know my IP address won't change. I could also use server 2, which happens to be my host name. And now this name here isn't what's resolved. This is going to be my human readable name, the name that's listed up here. So you'll want these to sometimes be in a particular order. Keep in mind these will get shuffled alphabetically. And then the MAC address. The only time you really need the MAC address is if you want to be able to do a remote power on. But I happen to like that. So I'm going to use this MAC address. You'll type this in with no spaces. There's no copy and paste option for this one, really, because anytime you're copying and pasting it, you usually see it with dashes or with dots. You have to scrape those out for the MAC address for iTALC. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm incorrect about that. This is one that you actually need to do colons. In the past, I've actually copied and pasted with dashes, and that will not work. You do need the colons in there. We say OK. And then within my classroom, I now have server 2. If I double click on server 2, it'll appear in my screen. And if all goes well, I can actually see that screen from here. And if I do anything on this screen, like move this around, every half second or so, you should see an update in this. So if you've got 20, 30 computers in your room, you can watch all of their screens all at once. A couple other things you can do. You can do a full screen demo, which allows the destination computer to demonstrate for everybody. Actually, this is the one that lets the students show the demo to everyone in the room, where everybody's screen then suddenly looks like the student's screen. Then you can do a full screen demo where your screen gets demoed out to them. So this is a way to work without having to necessarily use a projector. You can demo just a single window. You can lock their display. This one's kind of fun. If you need to lock their display so they'll pay attention to something up in the front of the room, you can actually lock them right out. And then by double clicking on them, you can unlock them again. Now in my case, double clicking on them is a view live. So I'm actually going to be able to view this screen live as it changes. And then to get out of that, I can go up to the very top and choose quit. I can also take snapshots here, or I can switch to the remote control mode, where I could then manipulate their screen. This is great if somebody has a question and you need to move their screen around or point something out to them. You can just jump in, take over their screen temporarily, and then switch back and watch them continue to work. When you're in view mode, you can't do anything to their screen. Only they can manipulate their screen. I'm going to quit back out of this. A couple other things you can do. You can send a text message like, hey, that's not allowed, or something like that if you need to. It'll do a little pop-up on their screen. Here's a test message for my user, and there it is. Message from the teacher. And then they can say OK to close that out. If you've specified the MAC address, which is completely optional, you can do a remote power on as long as the computer's waiting and listening on its Ethernet card to pick up that power on. This one sometimes needs a little bit of tweaking to work, but it's a nice feature if you want to come in and immediately turn on all the computers in your room. You can reboot, or you can power down those machines, or you can actually execute commands on those machines. So I'm going to say reboot. All right, am I sure I want to reboot that computer? Yes. And what I'm going to see happen over here is that computer reboots. Now, of all those actions that you can take on individual stations, you can also take those actions on the classroom as a whole. If you want a full screen demo for everybody in the room at once, or you can full screen demo for just select stations. You can log out all your users as well, take snapshots of all of them. Once this comes back up, I'll demonstrate the take snapshot. Now, right now my host is unreachable because that service won't start running until the computer starts back up. But even when you're logged out, you'll still be able to see that machine because the service runs not in user space, it actually runs behind the scenes as a Windows service. And of course you can move these around and arrange them. You can automatically adjust them to your available space, which is all pretty handy. I'm going to do a snapshot as well, and I'll just go in Actions and take Snapshot. And you don't have to worry about it again unless you want to go and see it. And here's the snapshot. It's a PNG file, and you can show that if you ever needed to show what was actually on the screen at that time. It was slowly building my server manager, so there's not much to really see. And then if you want, you can delete it as well. You can collapse this down so you can just view all of your machines. You can automatically adjust them and arrange them, which I find pretty nice. The auto view works pretty well. But now of all the changes that I've made in my iTALC teacher station, they won't take effect until you save out. And you don't have to click save or anything like that, but you do need to close your iTalc client. If it crashes in the middle and you've made changes, those changes won't get saved back to that global config file. So you will want to make sure that once you make a lot of changes, I recommend to close out just in case anything crashes. I have noticed in certain situations, or maybe it's video driver related, that iTalc will crash on occasion. So you will want to close out if you've made a lot of changes, just to lock in your changes. And that is iTalc in a nutshell.